written that column every year, but I love the way that Whittingham described the writing of that column, which is merrily elbows swinging back and forth in what, like, is it walk or dance?
Skipping.
It's singing in the rain.
It's okay. Wow,
That's
it's that.
true.
So it's Fred Astaire type dancing.
You're a young man in the rain.
Yeah, it's a weird reference for you to make.
I'm riding in the rain.
So, yes, Greg Cote has written that column for 20 years. Reasons to be optimistic. Chad Henne only threw 2 second-half interceptions.
Here are these select stats from Ryan Tannehill that prove why he's going to be great this year.
Okay, and at 8-3, everything looked copacetic. Everything looked great. Stugotz and I were right. They were headed to the Super Bowl. They went all in like very few teams do. The Rams did a couple of years ago and won a Super Bowl.
Tell 'em.
The Dolphins went all in. They went all in with the Tyreek Hill trade.
They've lost 5 in a row.
Went all in with the Terran Armstead signing. Went all in by signing Bradley Chubb at great cost in the middle of the season.
And again, Jessica's Steelers and Kenny Bleepin Pickett have the same record, and she's saying the same things. Well, we need some things to happen to make the playoffs.
It's because Tua was injured. It's because he missed all these games with 2 concussions.
Kenny Pickett, by the way, also was not in a bunch of games because he had 2 concussions this season.
I get it.
And their backup.
And that's legit. The problem with Dolphins and optimism.
Like this
skipped right past
Kenny Pickett has like 6 touchdown passes this year.
Yeah.
He's not exactly a valuable commodity to
And
the
they
Pittsburgh
still
Steelers
ended
winning.
up in the
They're
same.
all at the end of.
That's not true.
They're all at the end of games. He's won them the games
He
at
has
the
won
end.
them the last 2 games in a row.
Correct.
It's because their defense is pretty good, which Miami's wasn't. Najee Harris didn't even have a good year. They still are 8-8.
2
That's
ways to skin a
impressive.
cat.
That's impressive.
Greg, I will say this. You talk about all the additions on the offense and on the defense, and aren't they done to win games like at San Francisco, at Los Angeles, at Buffalo versus Green Bay and versus New England, where they all lost those 5 games in a row, and Tua threw over 300 yards once against the Packers?
The defense has been a huge disappointment. The special teams are awful. Dolphins are last in almost every metric on special teams, which nobody ever talks about. But the overarching thing with the Dolphins and optimism moving forward is Tua. He's very great when he's very good when he's healthy, but
how
he's
can you have
a
any
breakable
confidence?
Quarterback.
Right, exactly. How can you have any
He's made of
confidence now going
porcelain.
forward?
When you drop him, he breaks. And I've had a couple of football players, former NFL players, former college players, tell me that he doesn't even know how to be sacked correctly. He falls wrong. He falls on his back, so his head snaps back. You know, when you're sacked, generally you have a little bit of control on how you fall when you're sacked. Not always, but sometimes you're supposed to fall on your shoulder. In both of his concussions, he falls right on his back and his head snaps.
Do you realize the qualifiers that you're placing here are the most fragile of hope destroyers? And we're talking about it again, a day removed from the perils of that sport. And I really don't know. Like, it's a different conundrum than the Tannehill conundrum where we were arguing about it for 7 years. But the Tua thing is one of the most confusing things I've ever seen in sports. I'm not even kidding with the whole... I've got to get him all of these perfect pieces so that in the modern age of quarterbacking, I can get a system quarterback who looks like the best quarterback in the league because I put together these pieces. However, my defense is terrible, and now I'm 8-8, and I don't know if Tyreek Hill and Waddle can stay healthy next season because of the perils of their sport, and you keep hoping on these things that are the flimsiest of things, and at that position... You're doing so with a quarterback I've never seen analyzed this way. Like, fraud 1 week. Well, he played at San Diego and San Francisco. That looked like fraud to me. Or is it his head scrambled when he throws 3 interceptions against the Packers? Like, the analysis is crazy. It's a crazy thing to bet millions and hundreds of millions of dollars on. The idea of, can my quarterback in a sport that's unsafe keep his brain okay? Right. When I don't know how to protect him, I've been terrible on the offensive line, and Greg Cody's coming in here saying, Super Bowl, Super Bowl, Super Bowl, except my quarterback doesn't know how to fall.
Singing in the Rain was released in 1952. Whittingham, what are you doing?
So Greg was like 50?
It's a very common cultural reference, I would say.
It is. Yeah, beautiful song, too.
What?
Singing in the rain. You know, it connotes, you know, you're joyous, and it's like, you know what, no matter the situation around me, I'm gonna keep going. I'm singing in the rain.
I got a more modern reference for you. Wake me up before you go. That's what
That's fair. In terms of the,
excellent.
That's also
Yes.
an
That's
oldie.
ancient. What
That's
are you
also
saying?
that's an oldie.
Well, it's
by
more
our-
recent,
not as
though.
old.
I mean-
wake me up before you. Yes, it's more recent than Singing in the Rain. I mean,
So Greg was like 60 when that song came out.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes, indeed. Singing in the Rain's a classic. Fred Astaire's a classic. He's the best
Okay.
hoofer of his era.
no. Okay, please. We're going for a younger demo than
Why am I on here then?
fair shout.
Hoofer.
Yes, Fred Astaire.
Hoofer.
Yeah.
You described him as, I don't think I've heard that term since Fred Astaire was Singing in the Rain.
Well, back in that era, you were either an Astaire guy or a Gene Kelly guy. I was an Astaire.
You could
guy.
only be one? Is
Yeah,
that really?
They were like McCartney versus Jagger.
Have
I
you-
was an Astaire guy.
Really?
That is not what it was. That is
Gene
not.
Kelly had a lot of support back then.
I mean, he was there for it. You weren't. I mean,
I have read of history, and he is basically having dance-offs with two of the whitest people in the history of dance.
Hoofer sounds like a male cow.
As opposed to heifer.
Yeah, like hoofer and
What
heifer.
is a hoofer? I've not heard that expression in many, many years,
Right.
and I've never heard I've heard crooner. I have not heard hoofer.
Just a dancer. That's all. Just a dancer.
Gene Kelly,
Yeah.
by the way, from Pittsburgh.
There you
Big
go.
fan of my Steelers.
How about that?
the
Probably
release date
yeah.
for Wake Me Up Before You Go was somewhere in the 90s, but it was brought back by Glee, Dan, in 2014. That's a much more modern reference. Seriously.
Glee is also an ancient reference. I'm sorry.
The
That
10
was
years
15
ago.
Leah Michelles ago.
The thing that Whittingham was giving off more than Fred Astaire or Singing in the Rain was just a general Broadway musical type of happiness. Prancing around the stage, elbows out, a little bit of Ric Flair in it, but jollier, more gleeful, you might say.
It's what I was going for in the big game when everyone criticized my bad acting. Just sort of like look at us. We're on our way to L.A. Like I was doing
It
like
was
that.
bad acting.
Come on.
Should have been more like Gene Kelly.
Upward inflection.
He was trying to go for a jovial Broadway happiness, and it is the column that Cote has written for 20 years. And now, because he's been proven wrong by this team, betrayed again, his homerism again resulting in being soaked in mediocrity that really doesn't change if they win by a bounce against the Jets, who also are on the precipice of this shitty diarrhea-stained
I think
area.
It does, though. I think for as much as this record sucks as a fan, it's 8-8. It's the same season the Dolphins have had my entire life. I do think that when you take on the context of 4 of the games have been lost when the backup quarterbacks have been in, right? That is appropriate context, I would say.
The last 5 by 1 score against non-losing teams.
Right, and if you look at like the points given up or the point differential, a lot of that comes in that 40 to whatever loss to the Jets, giving up a pick 6 this past weekend to the Patriots. You've got 4 games you lose with a backup quarterback. I would actually dare say that Greg has been right. Very right. He was sort of the South Florida media voice that was leading Tuanon quite significantly. You kept saying you believed in Tua. I think he can do this. Tua still leads the NFL in quarterback rating, even after this bad month that he has had. He has put up great numbers. The offense has flowed. It's only when he gets concussed or plays the San Francisco 49ers, who are a damn good defense. The one mark against his record this year has been his performance against the Los Angeles Chargers. It was a beat-up defense. It was a bad performance. But sometimes...
And the fourth quarter against the Packers, when none of us
he was
knew at the
concussed.
time. Yeah, but none of us knew at the time he was concussed.
Yeah.
Then you're given the information afterward that he was concussed.
But in the overall, Greg has been right about this offense and about Tua.
Right.
Every time they have stepped on the field in normal circumstances, I have felt good about how they move the ball. Even in that Green Bay game, the first half was really exciting. That Jalen Waddle's 75-yard touchdown was exciting. Tua even had throws in that second half, in and amongst the terrible interceptions. They were pretty good throws. This offense works, in my opinion. There are people who have been criticizing Mike McDaniel in this past week for losing 5 in a row, and fair enough. You can't argue with the results. But I think Greg has been right about this team, even as they stare at the same record as they usually have.
And Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle have been exactly as great as a tandem as I thought they would be. They have 3,000 yards between them with a game to play. They've been great. Tua, when healthy, has been pretty damn great. Pro Bowl quality great, but the health issue is the big thing with him, and you can't get around it.
And that's the frustrating bit heading into your future is you have the same question, but in a completely different way. Can you project Tua forward? Which is last year is because I thought he was bad, and this year it's because he was good, but he cannot keep his brain protected.
Stay healthy,
But
right?
the decision is going to come up. This is where they get into a really bad spot organizationally by going all in on this year. It's a terrible spot. They're going to have to decide whether to pay him. And in that sport, when you are the team that went into this season, whether the defense performed or not, that was supposed to be an elite front four and elite secondary. Injuries made that hard, and again, gave up more points than any team in the conference except for the Colts, and only are behind the Colts by 2. Like, gave up a lot of defense. You cannot tell me that team that went into Buffalo and played that football game isn't good enough to beat any team in the sport anywhere, given how Tua and that offense played. And then all of a sudden they're up 28-21, but it's Josh Allen's going to run for 44 yards, longest run of his career. And in that game, you're going to lose to the Bills that way. When he did enough, they did enough. And that Bills game is something the Dolphins have been losing for 20 years, and it ain't that way. It ain't where you're like, oh, they're just as good as the best in the sport. But you're going to have to pay Tua, and you're going to have to pay him on the decision of, oh my God, I'm going to have to pay backups too. I'm going to have to pay backup quarterbacks. And all of this is within the context of, again, a question that I can't answer that we were asking yesterday that you weren't here, Cody. Should Tua keep playing?